We're going to talk today a little bit about David. David's one of the most fun people to talk about in terms of Bible characters, because David had some really great stuff that went on, and he had some really tough stuff that went on, and he had some really bad stuff that he did. And yet, as we look back through David, he's often referred to as the greatest king. He's referred to as the even Jesus was of the house of David. Okay, so that's how David is remembered and how David is looked back on. And even at one point, David is referred to as a man after God's own heart. So it's interesting to look at David because he goes through so many different things in his life. Obviously, we're not covering all of those things today, but we're probably going to talk about what I would suggest is the most famous thing that David deals with. So I called the sermon today, "The Lion, the Bear, and the Giant." David has this situation that takes place, and we're going to read in 1 Samuel chapter 17. And I think maybe in the bulletin, actually I have it right here, I said verses 34 to 36, but we're actually going to read a little bit more than that. We're going to read start in verse 32. It should be on the screen. Good. Okay, so the backstory is David has gone to the battlefield. The Israelites are in battle with the Philistines, and of course this is the story of David and Goliath. This is the story of David against the giant. And David is trying to talk to Saul, and he's going to try to convince Saul. He says to Saul, "I want to go fight this giant. I'm going to go fight. I'm going to go fight for my country. I'm going to go fight for my people, but ultimately I'm going to fight for my God. I want to go and fight." And this is what he says. "Don't worry about this Philistine," David told Saul. "I'll go fight him." And Saul replies this, "Don't be ridiculous." And if you're wondering what I'm reading the New Living Translation. He says, "Don't be ridiculous," Saul replies. "There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth." But David persisted. "I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats," he said. "When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death." Which I wish there was a little bit more of that story in the Bible. Sometimes you hear things and I'd kind of like to know the story of David, ripping the lion's jaw apart and clubbing it to death. That sounds like a good movie. Anyway, we can go to the next screen. "I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine." Saul finally consented. "All right, go ahead," he said, "and may the Lord be with you." This is a story of David, a young boy, trying to convince Saul, the king, that he should be allowed to go and fight the giant. This giant who was hurling insults, this giant who was putting down the children of Israel, this giant who was basically dominating the battlefield. David wants to go and fight him. And I'm sure you know, or as you know, the story goes that David actually does. He goes and fights, and he gets his sling ready, and with one shot he throws the sling and kills Goliath. David kills Goliath. And to this day, that's something that's used in society. It's a story that's sort of been passed down, and it's become part of even just terminology in different parts of our life. "Oh, that's a Goliath. That's a monster. That's something that's difficult for me to defeat or difficult for me to overcome." It's used in sports sometimes. You'll hear this is a real David and Goliath situation, where it's, especially in college sports, a big university against a little tiny one. Well, that's David and Goliath. It's sort of ingrained into society what David and Goliath is. But David also talks about this as a lion and a bear, situations that he's had in his past. And so this morning I want to talk about a couple of things. You can hit the next slide there, and the next one. The first thing I want to talk about is the fact that David had a destiny. Now, we can talk about this in a lot of different ways. I use the terms destiny and purpose. Sometimes we use the terms journey. It's basically about our life, about how ultimately God has a plan for us. He has a place for us. He has a purpose for our life. Now, that purpose isn't the same for me as it is for you. It's not a one-size-fits-all purpose because you have family and you have friends and you have a place in this world that only you occupy. No one else goes into the place that you're in. The people that you connect with, the people that you relate to, the people that are part of your life, the situations that you're in, your purpose will be contained in that place. Now, it might go beyond that. It might grow. It might be bigger. But ultimately, for each and every one of us, as long as we're still on this earth, God has a reason for us to be here. It might be something as simple as just being that helping neighbor. That person who helps and really honestly loves the people next to them. It might be somebody who, maybe today you can go down to the manor and you can help get some people out to the service. Maybe that doesn't seem like a lot, but for a lot of people that means something. And that can be a purpose. In each of our lives, God has this purpose and has this destiny. In David's life, he had a destiny. And in 1 Samuel chapter 18, we're just going to read, you can see we have verse 1 and then verse 13. So we kind of skip a middle bit. But that's just because I want just to get this picture. It says, "Now the Lord said to Samuel, you have mourned long enough for Saul." Saul's not going to be king anymore. God says, "I've rejected him as king of Israel, so fill your flask with olive oil and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I have selected one of his sons to be my king." And then in verse 13 it says, "So as David stood there among his brothers, Samuel took the flask of olive oil he had brought and anointed David with the oil. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on, and Samuel returned to Ramah." So this is David's destiny. He's anointed to be king. He's anointed to be the next king of Israel. That's a pretty big destiny, but David actually just went back into the fields and served his father as a shepherd, and he didn't go straight to the end of the line, right? And that's why I say sometimes we talk about this as a journey. David knew that one day he was going to be king. He knew that there was a destiny in front of him, but that didn't happen overnight. That took time. And honestly, for all of us in our life, there's things that God has for us, but it takes time. It takes time to get to this place that God has. It takes time to get to this situation that God has. And it's through that journey when the battles come around. It's through the journey of our life when we deal with these battles and we deal with these struggles and we deal with the things. And David, between the time he was anointed to be king and the time he became king, he at least fought one lion and one bear and one giant. He might have fought more lions and bears than just the one, because it doesn't specifically say that he at least fought one of each. So between where he was and where he was going, that's where the battles were. And honestly, for us, that's where the battles are in life, right? It's between where we were and where we're going, we're in today. And today is when we deal with the struggles. Today is when we deal with the issues. And for each of us, we deal with these things. Well, David is on the way to his destiny. But he's got to fight some battles in between. So we're going to talk about the battles, but we're also going to talk this morning about what those battles do and don't mean. Because sometimes we get misinformation. Sometimes we're encouraged, but in the wrong way. I guess you'd call that discouraged. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the lion. David fights a lion. Anybody see the new Lion King movie? I don't know if you like movies or not. A few people did. Took the kids to watch it. It's fine. You know, it's not my favorite movie. Never was. Don't love The Lion King. Lots of people love The Lion King. If you do, don't throw things at me, please. Lions are interesting creatures. When I was a kid, my dad loved watching those PBS shows about animals that killed other animals. I mean, I'm sure there was other things going on in the shows, but all I ever wanted to watch was the one animal kill the other animal. And everything I know about lions either comes from The Lion King or the TV shows my dad watched as a kid. So I might not actually know that much about lions, okay? I don't know that either of those were incredibly accurate. I assume PBS was more accurate than Disney, but I don't know that for sure. But I learned a couple of things about lions, and the first thing I learned, you can go to the next slide, is that lions do these sort of sneak attacks. Lions don't just run headfirst into battle. They sort of creep through the tall grass. They sort of hide away. They wait for an opportunity. Now, I've never seen a lion in real life. Well, I have seen lions at zoos, but I've never seen one in the wild. Anybody been on a safari and seen a lion in the wild? You have? Yeah. I know that that's something you can do. I've just never had the opportunity to do it. But I have watched my cat hunt birds. So I'm not sure it's exactly the same, okay? I know that my cat isn't exactly a lion. Actually, my cat's not with us anymore, but I've seen my cat, I've seen other cats, I've seen cats hunt things, and they don't just run face headlong into this battle. They creep. And you can probably get an image of your mind of a cat creeping through the grass. This is what lions will do. Although they're big, ferocious beasts, they don't just run into battle, they creep into battle. They pick their opportunity. They slow down and they move silently into a position where they can make an attack and be successful. The second thing about lion attacks that I learned, you can go to the next one, is they go after weaknesses. So they'll wait for, say, there's a herd of, I don't know, deer, or maybe not deer, antelope, whatever. Anyway, there's this herd. They wait and they pick off the one that gets left behind. They get the weakest animal in the herd. They find the one that's left at the back. They get the weak one that's left alone. That's the one that they take out because it's less work and because it's not as difficult. So they make a sneak attack, but they also go after the weakness. When David talks about fighting a lion that stole a sheep or a ram or a goat from his father's fields, it's very likely that it was a young one that was stolen, that got maybe left behind by the herd or maybe wandered too far away. The lion wasn't going to jump right in the middle and take the strongest, biggest one. It was going to take the one that was most easily available. David's fight against the lion kind of relates to our own life, because sometimes in our lives, this is an area where we're attacked. A sneak attack, a surprise attack, something that discourages us, something that comes against us, something that we're not expecting. It blindsided us, it came out of nowhere. I talked last week a little bit about sometimes we deal with times in life where the wheels kind of come off and we're not expecting it, and it's just happening. That's kind of what happens with the lion. This is a sneak attack, but it's also an attack on a weakness. David later in his life deals with this in a different way. Instead of dealing with a lion, he's dealing with temptation. It's a weakness that he's dealing with. And in our lives, we deal with these sneak attacks, but we also deal with weaknesses, and we deal with the times in our life when we have to deal with those things, like whether it be temptation or whether it be other issues in our life, weaknesses. David was able to overcome the lion, though. So I want to encourage you today that although sometimes there's things that come against us, there's discouragements, there's things that happen to us in life, they can knock us down. Maybe, again, it could be something unexpected like an illness or a sickness, or it could be a death in the family, or it could be these things come out of nowhere. We're not expecting them. But we can overcome that. We don't have to get stuck in that. We don't have to be stuck in that moment. We can overcome it, just as David was able to overcome the lion. The next battle he had was with a bear. I don't know if they were in chronological order. Maybe he fought the bear first. Bears are different than lions, though. The first thing a bear does, you can go to the next slide, is it overpowers you. Now, the lion is stronger, but the lion will sneak up. Bears don't really sneak up. Now, you might not see it. That's your fault. But I have seen bears in real life, and thankfully they haven't been trying to attack me. But they also weren't really all that worried about me. I saw a couple bears on the road one time, and I had to just stop. They weren't getting out of the way. I was in my car, and they just looked, and that was it. I just stopped and waited. And I was honestly praying that they didn't charge my vehicle, only because I don't think I could have explained what was even happening. I wouldn't have known what to do. I just didn't know. Bears are overpowering. But the other thing about bears is, you can go to the next slide now. Bears are seasonal. What I mean by seasonal is this. You're really not very likely it doesn't matter what kind of outdoorsman you are, you're not going to be attacked by a bear in the middle of January. You know why? Because bears are hibernating. They're not on the attack. They're not looking for food. They're not looking for anything at that time of year. They're hibernating. They're asleep. They're seasonal. There's a pattern to when they're around and when they're not. And as I was thinking about David's battle with this and how that sort of relates to our own life, the bears that we fight, the lions that we fight are the surprise things. The lions that come against us are the sort of sneak attack things. But the bears are really the things that we constantly deal with. Yeah, sometimes we have those big moments where just something happens in our life. Like last weekend when my transmission went. That was like a big thing. But you know, there's also those things that are regular, seasonal things. Things that happen in our life and they come against us. And for some people, it's maybe things like dealing with addictions. Something that, man, they do good for a while, and then for whatever reason it comes back. And do good for a while, but then I'm still fighting it. I'm still trying to get through it. I'm still trying to get past it. I'm still trying to move beyond it, but it seems like I take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Paul kind of talks about that in the New Testament when he talks about I do the things that I don't want to do and I don't do the things that I know I should do. It just seems like there's this constant battle, because although the lion attacks us and maybe it's this sort of catastrophic thing that happens, I feel like the bear, because of the pattern and sort of the rhythm of the bear going into hibernation and then waking up, David didn't have to worry about bears at certain times. But there were other times where the bear could come back. And the bear could come back. And he'd have to deal with it over and over and over again. He'd have to deal with it. And it wasn't something that he could just defeat once and say, well, that's it, that's the end. Because next time the bears come out of hibernation, they're going to be hungry again. They're going to be looking for food again. It's going to happen again. I know that this is something that's happened that several people deal with when it comes to dealing with death. I'm not obviously going to ask for any specific details. But you know, if you've had someone who's died, maybe a parent or a close friend, when the anniversary of their death rolls around, that's a difficult time. It's a hard thing to deal with that, especially if it's someone you were really close to. I have a friend whose mom passed away a couple of years ago. And every year when that anniversary of that death comes around, she really struggles. She has a hard time. And the same thing goes for maybe Christmas time, or it goes for birthdays, or these are things battles that we all deal with. And we're not talking about fighting with fists and swords and knives. We're talking about in our hearts. Because those are the moments where maybe we decide to turn to that addiction, or we decide to turn to that thing that drags us down, that causes us to make bad decisions, could even cause us and lead us into sin. We look for relief from those things. But David learned to overcome not just the attack of the lion, which comes as a sneak attack and attacks that, but he also learned to overcome the bear, which is that battle that happens over and over again. The battle that, I somehow managed to defeat the bear this March, April, when it came out of hibernation. But next year, guess what? There'll be another bear. Be another bear. Like picking rocks. This is farm country. Spend a lot of time on farms. I know the thing we grow the most of in this part of the world isn't potatoes, it's rocks. We grow a lot of rocks. Doesn't matter how often a farmer picks rocks in his field, guess what? There's more rocks. Every time you turn around, well, we got this one done, there's more rocks. Let's go dig the potatoes. What do we have to do? We dig the potatoes, we have to pull the rocks out. Even if we already did rock picking, you still got to do it. It's constant. And there are things that we deal with in our life that they don't just stop. It's not just a once and done battle and we're out of here. It's a constant. But David was able to have victory over the bear. And the third thing, of course, that David fought was the giant. I'm going to go through, I got 3 points here under the giant, so you can just go, put all 3 up at once. There you go. Oh, go back one. The giant looks and talks big, the giant intimidates, and the giant uses mind games. Goliath, if you read through the story, and again, we just don't have time to read through this whole story, it's fairly long. Goliath basically comes out every morning, and he stands, and he starts yelling at the Israelites. You guys can't beat me. You're no good. Look how big I am. I'm mocking you. And that's why David got so upset, is because he heard Goliath yelling these insults. As far as we know, Goliath had never fought an Israelite. There's no record in the Bible of Goliath fighting any of the Israelites. No one had stepped up because they were all so afraid of him because he was big and he talked big. Even Saul says, Goliath, he's been a man of war from his youth. You'll never defeat him. But he hadn't went out to fight him. All he was doing was listening to his words. All he was doing was listening to that intimidation. And in our life, quite often, the giants that we face aren't the big attacks of the lion, and they aren't the recurring attacks of the bear, but they're the attacks of intimidation. You're not good enough. You don't deserve God's love. You don't deserve God's grace. You don't deserve God's mercy. You've made too many mistakes. You've failed too many times. You've done too many wrong things. And that's the giant I honestly think that most of us face in life. It's why it's so important that we sing about God's love. It's why it's so important that we remember that God loves us and cares for us and is so full of grace for us, because the biggest battles we fight aren't from the outside, but they're the battles that come against us that say, you're not good enough. You're not strong enough. God doesn't want to use you. God doesn't want to help you. God doesn't care about what you're going through. All of those things are lies. All of those things aren't true. But they're giants that each of us face in our life. And here is a giant, Goliath, standing up in front of the people saying, I am better, I am stronger, I am bigger, and there's nothing you can do about it. And David comes and he says, wait a minute. That's not true. And Saul the king says, yeah, that's true. And David said, I don't believe it. Let me fight. God's helped me fight the lion. God's helped me fight the bear. And God's going to help me fight this giant too. Finally, Saul says, okay, you can go do it. And with one shot, David overcomes Goliath. With one shot, David defeats the giant. David goes through these battles. Now, the thing about battles is they're real and they can hurt. I don't imagine that David grabbed a lion by the jaw and beat it with a club and then walked away like nothing had ever happened. Probably wore him out. Probably wore him down a little bit. He was probably a little tired. Probably went home and grabbed his harp, kicked back on the couch, and plucked a tune. Had a little rest. Because battles are real, and I know I'm talking to people, because everywhere I go I'm talking to people who've gone through battles. You've gone through things in your life. And sometimes they wear you out, and sometimes they knock you down, and sometimes they're difficult, and sometimes they're hard. But I want to encourage you today that in the battle you can trust God. Because God brings victory. Our own strength doesn't do it. Our own power, our own wisdom, it doesn't do it. Even David knows. God helped me. That's what he said. God helped me with the lions and the bears. He's going to help me with the giant too. And guess what? He did. But I want to talk about battles quickly. I want to give you some battle facts, okay? You can go to the next slide. Just keep it there for a second. See, the truth is, all of us are sort of on this journey. We're not where we were, but we're not where we're going. We haven't arrived. I don't want to burst your bubble. You haven't arrived yet. You still got more life to live. You still got more going on. So you're somewhere on the journey. You're somewhere on this path. And that means that no matter where you are on that journey, you're going to have some battles. And it might be a lion. It might be something that comes out of nowhere. Or it might be a bear. It might be this battle that happens over and over and over again. And it seems like once you get through it, it comes back. Or it might be, and it's very likely for all of us at one point or another, is the giant that says, you're not good enough. You don't deserve it. God doesn't care. You've made too many mistakes. You've failed too many times. And we all deal with those things, those things. So I want to give you some facts going forward, okay? So this is how we're going to finish up the message today. I'm going to give you some facts going forward because you're going to be in some battles. So the first one is this. A battle doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. David was out in the field tending his sheep. And he had to fight a lion and a bear. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't in the wrong place. He was doing exactly what his father had asked him to do. Exactly what he was supposed to be doing, and it didn't mean that he was doing something wrong. When David went down to the battlefield and said, I want to fight Goliath, he wasn't fighting that battle because he had done something wrong. That was a battle that was set before him that he knew he could defeat. Sometimes we get discouraged and we feel like, man, there's so many things going wrong in my life and there's so many issues and I'm dealing with so many things. What am I doing wrong? Truthfully, a battle isn't a sign that you're doing anything wrong. David wasn't doing anything wrong. I often think about Jesus when he said a couple of different times in the New Testament, he tells the disciples, let's get on the boat and go to the other side. So they all get in the boat and they start going, and then what happens? Inevitably, there's a storm. There's always a storm. That doesn't mean they did something wrong. They were doing what Jesus told them to do. They got on a boat. They were doing exactly what he said, and yet they were in the middle of a storm. We don't have to be doing something wrong to have a battle. So if you're dealing with something in your life today, don't just think that it's just because you did something wrong. That's not how it works. Sometimes there's battles there